Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of Photon Photography. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that every photographer should know, the exposure triangle. The exposure triangle is a concept that explains the three elements that work together to create a well-exposed photograph. These elements are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Let's take a closer look at each of them. First, let's talk about aperture. Aperture is the opening in the lens that allows light to reach the camera's sensor. It's measured in f-stops, with larger numbers indicating a smaller aperture, and vice versa. Aperture controls depth of field, which is the amount of an image that's in focus. A shallow depth of field, achieved with a wide aperture, is great for portraits, while a deep depth of field, achieved with a narrow aperture, is ideal for landscapes. Next, let's talk about shutter speed. Shutter speed is the amount of time that a camera's shutter is open, letting light reach the sensor. It's measured in seconds, or fractions of a second. Shutter speed controls motion blur, with a fast shutter speed, freezing motion, and a slow shutter speed, creating blur. Finally, let's talk about ISO. ISO measures the sensitivity of the camera's sensor to light. A low ISO is used in bright conditions to avoid overexposure, while a high ISO is used in low light conditions to avoid underexposure. However, a higher ISO can result in more noise or grain in the image. So the exposure triangle is all about balancing these three elements to create a well-exposed image. Aperture, shutter speed, and ISO all affect the amount of light that reaches the camera's sensor. And by adjusting one or more of these elements, you can control the final result. The key to understanding the exposure triangle is to experiment and see how each element affects your images. Try shooting the same scene at different apertures, shutter speeds, and ISO settings, and see how the results differ. The more you practice, the better you'll become at controlling the exposure triangle to create the images that you want. That's it for this week's episode. I hope you found this information helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more photography tips and tricks.